Monday, August 5th, 1895. Senator Sanders walked with Mark to the station in Helena this morning, while I accompanied the ladies in a carriage. Whom should we meet walking the platform of the station but Mrs. Henry Ward Beecher on her way to visit her son Herbert in Port Townsend. It was a delightful surprise. Senator Sanders at once recognized her. In 1883, he joined our party and drove from Helena, then the end of the eastern section of the Northern Pacific Railroad, to Missoula, the eastern end of the Western Division. In 1883, we drove in a carriage with 4 horses via Butte and Deer Lodge, and it took 4 days to make the journey. Today, Senator Sanders traveled the same distance with us in 5 hours in a Pullman car. At Missoula, we all drove in a bus to the Florence house, the ladies inside and Mark and I outside with the driver. Here we saw the first sign of the decadence of the horse, a man riding a bicycle alongside the bus, leading a horse to a nearby blacksmith shop. At Mark's suggestion, I caught a snapshot of that scene. Officers from Fort Missoula, 4 miles out, had driven in with ambulances and an invitation from Lieutenant Colonel Burt, Commandant, for our entire party to dine at the fort. The ladies accepted. Mark went to bed and I looked after the business. We had a large audience in a small hall, the patrons being mainly officers of the fort and their families. As most of the ladies who marry Army officers come from our best Eastern society, it was a gathering of people who appreciated the occasion. After the lecture, the meeting took the form of a social reception, and it was midnight before it broke up. On the way back to the fort that evening, Colonel Burt told Twain that he was taking him to a place where he wouldn't have to entertain, but he himself would be entertained. Mr. Twain threw up his hands and said, "Great heavens, is there such a place of delight on earth?" As it turned out, Twain was continuously surrounded by officers. Every time he would try to tell a joke, an officer would interrupt, saying, "Beg your pardon, Mr. Clemens, permit me to tell a little incident." The officer would tell an old Army story. After each story, Twain would start in on another story of his own, but again he'd be interrupted. Finally he exclaimed, "Beg you, give me just one chance." After the laughter died down, he added in his inimitable drawl, "Aye, boys, I haven't had one put over on me as good as that since the old Comstock days." The day has been one of delight to all of us. As we leave at 2:30 p.m. tomorrow, all have accepted an invitation to witness guard mounting and lunch early at the fort. August 6th, 2 ambulances were sent to the hotel for our party, and Adjutant General Ruggles, who was here on a tour of inspection. Mark rose early and said he would walk to the fort slowly. He thought it would do him good. General Ruggles and the ladies went in one ambulance, the old 4-mule Army officer's ambulance, and the other waited some little time before starting that I might complete arrangements for all the party to go direct from the fort to the depot. I was the only passenger riding with a driver and enjoying the memory of like experiences on the plains when in the Army. We were about halfway to the fort when I discovered a man walking hurriedly toward us, quite a distance to the left. I was sure it was Mark and asked the driver to slow up. In a minute I saw him signal to us and asked the driver to turn and drive toward him. We were on a level plain, and through that clear mountain atmosphere one can see a great distance. We were not long in reaching our man, much to his relief. He had walked out alone and taken the wrong road, and after walking 5 or 6 miles on it, discovered his mistake and was counter-marching when he saw our ambulance and ran across lots to meet us. He was tired, too tired to express disgust, and sat quietly inside the ambulance until we drove up to headquarters, where were a number of officers and ladies besides our party. As Mark stepped out, a colored sergeant laid hands on him, saying, "Are you Mark Twain?" "I am," he replied. "I have orders to arrest and take you to the guardhouse." "All right." And the sergeant walked him across the parade ground to the guardhouse, he not uttering a word of protest. Immediately, Lieutenant Colonel Burt and the ambulance hurried over to relieve the prisoner. Colonel Burt very pleasantly asked Mark's pardon for the practical joke and invited him to ride back to headquarters. Mark said, "Thanks. I prefer freedom. If you don't mind, I'll walk." "I see you have thorough discipline here," casting an approving eye towards the sergeant who had him under arrest. The garrison consisted of 7 companies of the 27th United States Colored Regiment. There was a military band of 30 pieces. Guard mount was delayed for General Ruggles and our inspection. The band played quite a program, and all declared it was one of the finest military bands in America. We witnessed some fine drilling of the soldiers and learned that for this kind of service, the colored soldiers were more subordinate and submissive to rigid drill and discipline than white men, and that there were very few desertions from among them. When the band, in trooping off, had marched past the guard and was counter-marching back to the post, Colonel Burt said, "Mr. Twain says in one of his books that there were 2 things he didn't understand. One is the solar eclipse and the other is the counter-marching band." Twain replied, "You're right, Colonel, on both counts. I haven't solved the band proposition even now. And as for the other count, I was modest before I was born." The Clemens party traveled the 150 miles or so by train from Missoula to Spokane, Washington.